and welcome to the second episode of
Like
Like
literally.
literally.
Woo! I'm going to go ahead and
Woo.
clip our previous go over the top of that. Like
Literally.
Hi, I'm Alysha.
Hey, I'm Alexis, or Momo's Bookshelf.
Hey, I'm Rylee.
So today we are here talking about Fourth Wing. And gosh, I probably consumed this book in about 24 hours on Momo's Kindle because she needed to talk about it so badly. She was willing to part with her Kindle so that I could read this book because it was available nowhere because she read it so freaking early in the hype. So, Momo, why don't you give us a little rundown about what's this book even about? Why is it all over Book Talk?
Okay, so Fourth Wing. It essentially is this novel that takes place at Basgiath War College. It is essentially in a post-rebellion, kind of like ongoing war, mixed with the genres of like romance and fantasy. You've got some dystopian vibes in there with kind of like this overall vibe of like very exaggerated military environment. At this college, young adults filter through this college, and like I said, we are in this like post-rebellion, ongoing war kind of thing. So it is a little bit more high risk, high reward. We start the book off following, as you kind of pretty much get to know as soon as you start it, from the perspective of Violet Sorrengail, who is forced into the Rider Quadrant by her mom, who is the commanding general of this war college, to essentially go through this process, follow her mom and her siblings' footsteps, and essentially try to survive. There are 4 quadrants at the college in which you can be sorted into and trained in, and that is the Rider Quadrant, the Medic Quadrant, the Scribes Quadrant, and the Infantry Quadrant. She was trained initially to be in the Scribe Quadrant like her dad, but like I said, gets forced into the Rider Quadrant by her mom. So very high risk, high reward. Definitely trigger warning. A lot of death involved. And you follow this journey as Violet goes through and makes friends, makes enemies, falls in love, and essentially finds out that there's more to the story than she's been trained to believe.
The book was kind of like dark academia vibes, kind of in like
Mm-hmm.
this war setting. Yeah, that would be the vibe I would give it.
So I read it on my Kindle. Alysha also read it on my Kindle. And then
I read it on
Rylee.
my Kindle.
But didn't you also listen to the audiobook at first?
No, because I read the reviews and had terrible reviews because she sounded sick. But you listened to the audiobook, right?
Yes, I do have the audiobook as well. I'm not gonna lie, I own this book in several formats. On the Kindle, the hard copy, and also the audiobook. So if that gives any inclination of my obsession. Yeah, the audiobook was terrible. Like, her voice was super nasally. She did not capture anybody's voice, in my opinion, correctly. Like, not any of Violet's friends, definitely not Xaden, not any of the dragons. Like, it was bad. Like, if they had maybe brought in a male narrator for Xaden and Dane and Liam and all them, I would have been like, oh, okay, that's like more tolerable.
So I guess while on the subject of like dislikes, what were some things that kind of killed the hype for you? I think the love interest felt immediately set up for me and it played out a little too smoothly with like not enough slow burn in my opinion.
Yeah, very much so Hunger Games vibes with that. Like, you could kind of tell immediately who was supposed to be, maybe, quote unquote, and then who it eventually was. So that's valid. I think for me, it was slightly predictable, but there were parts that I really wasn't expecting, and I was kind of kicking myself like, damn, how did I not expect that? That was kind of set up. I should have seen that predictability coming. But then there were other parts where I was like, yeah, that's pretty predictable. Color me shocked. So, but I don't think it ruined it completely, but it was something that I was like, ugh.
Yeah, I agree with Alexis. That's definitely my pet peeve is that I saw a lot of the book coming and it didn't like necessarily take away from the enjoyment of the book because like I wanted to know how it happened, but like I definitely knew what was coming next.
And on the flip side of the coin, things we enjoyed, what really was making the book live up to the hype. And I'm just going to kick us off again. I really like the diversity that was in the book, like the representation. The main character, Violet, had a disability. The other main character, Xaden, is a person of color. There was like representation of different sexualities, and it all felt like really not tokenized. And even like with Violet and her disability, like it was just like part of who she was. They didn't make like the disability become like part of her superpower or like something like that. Like it was a characteristic of her identity, but not her identity, if that makes sense. So I really appreciated that. Rylee, what sealed the deal for you?
I guess what made so I physically read this book, and one issue I have when I don't like listen to an audiobook is that I have a habit of getting sleepy when I start to read something, and I did not get sleepy during this one. There was always something going on to keep me engaged, and it had like a good flow to it, and I think that's what I really liked about the book.
10 out of 10. Rylee didn't fall asleep.
It's really a struggle right now. The past 3 books I've picked up have all made me just fall asleep. So it's been slow reading.
Haven't read Fourth Wing, now's the time. That was it right there. That was the review to convince you. If that was your sign.
That's going to be on the back of the book cover for the second one in review of the first one. I think Momo has some opinions about the portrayal of the military in this book.
Yeah, I do. So, if you're somebody who has like affiliation with it, so um to bring this context, so Rebecca Yarros is actually known for writing a lot of military influenced novels. She writes a lot of military romance, and not to be surprised that even her fantasy book had a lot of influence of it. She was an army brat herself, and her husband is a veteran. So, as we talked about in the last episode, Rylee and myself are both military affiliated, and I didn't hate it. So, was it obviously exaggerated for the fantasy genre? Definitely, because nowhere in any kind of actual military school in real life would anybody just be willingly put through training to die. That's weird. I feel like a lot of the relationships in this book I really, really vibed with because that's a lot of my friendships with people in the military, like the way that they bantered, the way that you get really close to people in the military very quickly, and depend on each other and all that kind of stuff. Very much so was a pretty decently accurate depiction. Honestly, like I really related throughout the whole book.
I hated the military part of it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I just found it kind of cheesy, like trying to relate this like super intense like school where people die and blah blah blah. And like I'm just thinking about like going to military academy or going to like basic training. I'm like, we ain't that tough. It ain't that I don't know. It ain't that deep, bro. Like
That's valid.
like
That's valid.
like, yes, there are friendships, there's stuff like that, there's different obstacle courses we go to, but I mean, the average person can most likely pass basic training, like as long as you're not you make height and weight standards. I don't know. I just thought that part was like very over exaggerated and kind of cheesy, but I was able to get over it, so I still enjoyed the book. It was just like every once in a while I would like roll my eyes and be like, I need a minute. Like, this is a little silly, but
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like you said with the fantasy, like in what we kind of touched on, like it was obviously super exaggerated, and it's like they're not doing anything that's gonna kill anybody at West Point. Like, first of all, it's kind of unethical, and secondly, but I guess at the same time, that's kind of where like the point and the premise of the book is that we're post some kind of war that obviously got them to this point, and that's the whole fantasy
Well,
subtext essentially.
I don't think it's post-war. I think it's ongoing war, which is wild to me then that they're killing off half their potential young fit warriors in this training. Like that's
exactly.
a question I've
Yeah, like
got for this world. The world building, I will say, was fairly weak outside of what is going on at this training school. Because yeah, I was just like Momo, just saying the question, like, what war? Like they get snippets of it during these like briefings in class, but like that's heavily veiled. And I mean, part of this is because we have a little bit of like unreliable narrator situation going on, but I really hope the next book like begins to build out what's happening in this war, because right now that lack of context just really left me like, what?
So I guess post the rebellion, essentially, that launched us into the context of which we're in. But I agree.
The book was just obviously written by somebody who's not necessarily in, but is associated with it.
Exactly.
Anyway.
So now at this point, we want to make a disclaimer that we will be discussing spoilers. We will be naming who love interests are. We will be naming what these conflicts are that are plaguing this country. So if you do not want to learn about any of these potential spoilers, please stop listening and turn us off. And as we transition into these spoilers, we thought we'd kick it off with a little bit of fun. Just how we pronounce the different names of the book. I always think this is really entertaining. My brain will just like leave out letters half the time if I just don't feel like dealing with them. I'm really curious to hear how you guys pronounce some of these words. Momo, since you're just talking about the military aspect, how did you pronounce the war college's name?
I think it's Basgiath, correct?
I did Basket.
I also did Basgith, and that was just me giving up on the I.
Ditto.
How about Violet Sorengale? I feel like, I don't know. Did you guys pronounce that any differently?
I did Sorengale because again I just ignored the I.
Yeah, I did Sorengale.
Zayden Ryerson.
Same.
Zayden R.
I
I don't like think too hard about this when I'm reading.
Riley's like, I'm here for a good time, man. All right. Rylee, I want to hear the long name pronunciations of both dragons.
Tornok. But then for like the shortened one, I moved the I this time to Taran. And then for the other one, I didn't even, I just read over the long name. I'm not even gonna lie to you. If I was gonna try it now, Andoranabam.
I read over Andoranarum as well. That was my first attempt at trying to read the word. I just
read over
glazed.
And then Andarna is how I pronounce the short one.
I agree with Andarna. I did Terran for Terninok. I also glazed over that one. That was my first attempt at trying to recognize how many vowels were in that word as well.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't even attempt it.
What I want to know is on our release post for this podcast, let us know whether or not you bothered to pronounce the dragons' full names. So speaking of the dragons, how did you imagine the dragons?
I definitely imagined like Game of Thrones style dragons, but like Andarna was like this cute, cuddly, like How to Train Your Dragon. Everybody else was Game of Thrones style though.
I was picturing like How to Train Your Dragon dragons.
All of them, I think I just had literally How to Train Your Dragon in my head.
That's what I said.
Why? Like the whole time I was like, How to Train Your Dragon, but scarier.
I was really surprised that my mind like jumped to How to Train Your Dragon because one, I've seen that movie like once and I've never seen any of the follow-ups. And two, like I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. So the fact that my brain just went cute and cuddly dragons versus like I was like, what do we skip here?
Yeah, no, mine were definitely not cute and cuddly other than Andarna. She was like
Valid.
just cute and fat and adorable and
She was
kind.
fat.
Yeah, I imagined her as like a chunky dragon with little wings. I don't think that's accurate to the writing, but that is how I pictured her in my head.
On the note of dragons, let's transition into like interesting theories. And one of the really interesting ones I recalled reading that at least like got me thinking, and I think it still leaves me more perplexed than anything. But I remember pretty shortly after reading the book coming across this theory that there's less dragons mating or bonding or pairing, whatever word the book used, because they're going off and sneakily pairing with the rebels. And I think the reason I found this so fascinating probably comes back to that complaint about the lack of world building. We like briefly get this like little window into the dragon society where there's like clearly this hierarchy of power and like institution and culture over like how they can be paired and the rules they have with interacting with humans, particularly when Violet's like pairing with two of them. But even like when Taryn is like bowing so that Violet can climb up onto his back, there's like, oh, this isn't how this is done. And so like I really have I don't know. I found this question of like, are there rebellious dragons? Are the dragons that are paired with like riders who end up switching to the rebellion? Like, what's that dragon side of the drama? I want to know now. So I don't know if my fascination's so much with this potential theory as it is like I want to know dragon culture. But that was one of the fun theory spirals I went into after reading this book.
Oh, that's just what my brain went to while reading.
Honestly, I kind of want to elaborate on that a little more. So like I feel like with the actual rebellion and the venom and what why they are so against like this rebellious crowd, and then with like the dragons and the dragon culture, like I feel like I left with more questions because, and I don't know if that was like her point, because almost like Violet towards the end of the book was left with more questions because what she thought she knew wasn't even really the whole story.
What does Violet know and what does Violet not know leads into like the other theory I wanted to bring up. And that's again coming back to this idea that like she's probably a little bit of an unreliable narrator. And I think part of that influence is Imogene. I am still confused as to like what her signet is. There's like one line in the book that says she can like wipe away recent memories. And I feel like that's happening throughout the book and we just don't know it. She's wiping our narrator's memories. And I would love if we get some of her perspective in the next book. Yeah, so what other like interesting theories do you guys have?
The theory about Violet's mom, which is that at one point she might have been attacked by venom, which is why she's so passionate about like fighting them essentially. And um that also kind of goes into the whole theory on why Violet is known for her silver hair, because she might have some of the like venom poison or whatever like in her system. And then at the end of the book when she gets attacked, like how she was essentially able to recover from it. And it also kind of played into the things that they find into in her mom's office when they break in. And then it also kind of plays into when she bonds with Taryn, when he says, "Oh, I know who you are." Like you kind of just at the surface assumed, "Oh yeah, it's because like she's Violet Sorrengail, duh." but I think they kind of played that whole theory into that because he like knows what's like inside of her, I guess. So that's another theory.
Out of 5 stars, what would we give the Fourth Wing?
5 out of 5. If that wasn't obvious.
So I give this one like a 4.5. It was somewhere between that. On Goodreads, I'd give it a 4.
So I've been keeping track of the books I've read this year on Apple Notes, as I've mentioned, and I bold the ones that I particularly enjoyed. And this one got bolded, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 because I've only bolded like 6 books so far this year. And for reference, I have finished 66 books this year. So let's go ahead and close out with Rylee. What are you reading right now?
I started at Lord of Thorns and Roses. I'm also reading. I'm trying to finish up The Gentleman in Moscow. I took a break from that book for a while and came back to it.
It was the super unenthusiastic A Court of Thorns and Roses for me.
Alysha, what are you reading?
So I'm still in the Sarah J. Maas universe, Empire of Storms, and I have just checked out the Tower of Dawn and like Kingdom of Ashes to do the tandem read between the two of them.
I am currently about to start the third and final installment of the Knockout series by Lucy Score. It is Things We Left Behind, just finished, Unholy by Neil Shusterman, I think is how you say his name. And that was the second book in the Unwind series.
And as for what we're doing next with this podcast, we have all watched and read Red, White, and Royal Blue. So we're going to do a movie and book comparison. So thank you all so much for listening through this episode. And we can't wait to talk to you more about this book and movie compare. That was a terrible sign off.
Rylee did not fall asleep.